I focus on being very intentional about how I approach the conversation and making sure that I'm approaching it from a perspective of active listening first and seeking to understand. And just there's certain beliefs that I have formed that it's important. Like, let me close my computer when somebody walks in the door so I'm not distracted. Let me not look at the clock. If the conversation is moving along, let me ask a clarifying question if there's something I don't understand or I'm not sure about. So just learning different tips and techniques and really working on my emotional intelligence too, that's been very important.
Welcome to Season 13 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. I want to thank you for watching, enjoy the show, and if you haven't already picked up a copy, I invite you to do so. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today, I am joined by Brandon Springle, who is a dedicated HR leader with 15 plus years experience across a wider range of industries, including manufacturing, health insurance, and sports entertainment. Brandon is certified as a change manager, as well as a psychological safety coach. He currently serves as a divisional OD and success director at Shaw Industries. Brandon recognizes that there is power in aligning individually diverse talents to a shared vision where team success is dependent upon the collective brain trust of the team. I love that. More than anything, Brandon loves to see people thrive as opposed to just survive. Oh yeah, I share that in common with you. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm going to share with the listeners and viewers how we met because it's such a special story. You reached out to me on LinkedIn because you were shopping for a new book. Your mom's a librarian, so I guess books are a big part of your life. And so you were shopping
Yes.
for a new book. And my book, which hadn't even hit the market, it was like pre-order, came up as a Amazon, if you bought this, you might like this. So
Absolutely. It was like neuroscience and empathy. Well, empathy primarily, and then neuroscience and psychological, all the things that I love to learn about, were wrapped up into your work. So it was an easy buy for me, an easy pre-order.
sweet. And then when I read about you, because you wrote to me and you're like, hey, I just, bought your book. And I was like, what? How on earth did you hear about my book? So I was very curious. And I read about your background and I was teaching a leadership class. And I was like, oh, I got to get you and as a guest speaker. So I had you in as a guest speaker. And now it's my turn to ask you a bunch of questions for the podcast. So let's go. In the meantime, since we've had that first connect, I guess that's like almost a year ago, I would guess, or maybe not quite a year, but close to it. You published a piece that you put out on LinkedIn about the EOP, which really caught my attention. You call that the empathy origin point. So we all have an empathy origin point story. What is yours?
Sure. So I was just reflecting because I had done another podcast and I was asked a question by the host on, was I an empathetic child? And I said, I don't think so. Like, I just remember being really quiet. Like, I don't remember actively demonstrating empathy. And so the question made me question myself and I had to go back and reflect. So I asked my mother, was I an empathetic child? And she gave me multiple examples. And so I began to just dig down into the recess of my brain. And what I came up with was when I was diagnosed with a condition known as amblyopia. And what that essentially is when your eye turns in. So I had to be patched at a very young age. And so that started to create different conversations. Some people were very supportive and very empathetic towards what I was going through, while other people weren't so nice. And I remembered the difference between the two. And it shifted the way that I looked at all other situations that maybe I wasn't familiar with, but just seeing humans as human beings, regardless of, what circumstances or what situations they may be facing.
So you were a kid wearing a little patch, and some people, didn't change how they interacted with you. Maybe they were extra kind because they had trouble seeing out of one eye, but then some other kids must have poked fun at you.
Right. And I'm 6 years old. So I have a picture and I found the picture and it just brought back all those memories. And it says when I was 6 and I have my patch on and my Dick Tracy shirt. And I'm sitting in my classroom at that time. And I just remember both the good and the challenging memories from that moment.
Beautiful. And so, what brought you to HR? I'm curious because I think that's a calling as a profession, human resources, because you really do want to allow relationships to flourish, people to flourish in their workplace.
Sure. So it's funny because things start so early as far as what we're interested in. So I'm actually preparing for a presentation on personal branding. And our personal brand starts with our personality when we're babies, essentially. Like I can look at my four children and they all have unique characteristics, but one that's common is they all are empathetic in some way. But for me, I wanted to develop talent. And at first it was around I love to build my basketball team. So I'd play the basketball video game and I'd find the right combinations. And then as the game started to evolve, players started to have personalities and we had to manage morale and so forth and so on. So I'm doing this in middle school and high school. And so I go into sport and entertainment management as my college major, but I get into that field and I'm like, ooh, I'm not sure that this is going to be the best long-term decision for me. And then I remembered a college class where I took HR management, just HR 101. And so I decided to go back to school and pursue a master's degree because my skill set and just the ability to really help people be at their best was what I enjoy the most about the profession. So pursued the master's degree, got SHRM certified, and went on about my way in HR in around, I think it was 2010. Yeah, so it was a while ago.
And it's such an important field right now because we're all talking about talent acquisition, talent retention, the war for talent, right? So, just as a complete aside, I'm just going to ask the fun question. You've probably been involved in lots of interviews and onboarding. What's a way, because I have young people in my life that are starting their careers, what advice would you give to a young person that's going into an interview and starting a new job, given your expertise in the field?
It's a two-way street. So a lot of times, especially younger people, they'll come into the interview really wanting to please or seek to impress the employer. And I think that's a good thing. You want to make a good impression, but you also understand that you have something to bring to the table as well, and that you want to go after companies that align with your values because it's not always about the money. I think the culture is the most important part and really understanding what is the culture here? How do other people feel about working here? And do a little bit of interviewing of your own, maybe even in advance. I think it's very wise to reach out to people to learn about their experience before you even go into an interview, just to get a feel for what company culture you're making yourself a part of potentially.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about organizational culture. So let me come back to that in a sec. To start with, from an HR perspective, what is the power of empathy in the workplace? Ta-da.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, from an HR perspective, it is the ability to see through the lenses of someone else and really meet them where they are, as opposed to, hey, this is the policy and the procedure. It's not always just black and white. There's a lot of gray that you have to navigate. And empathy, purposeful empathy, gives you the ability to navigate the gray with a sense of accuracy and proficiency and really get to the root of what a person may be experiencing because you're modeling vulnerability by asking questions and being curious. And they are more likely to respond in kind by telling you what they're actually struggling with, as opposed to telling you maybe what they think you might want to hear, things of that nature.
So, how do you think you've become a more empathic HR leader over the years through some of the training and coaching you've been doing?
I think just really pursuing learning. Like I never stopped learning. So I grew up in a library. I think you alluded to that earlier. And so helping people find resources, get to different information that they're searching for. So I've always been one to research and learn a lot about what I'm interested in. And so I've been interested in empathy for quite some time. I think it should be a core value for any place that's worth being in. And so just really diving deep and learning as much as I can and really seeking to apply it, seeking to model that. It doesn't come easily because I am more introverted. I am more quiet, which is why I thought I wasn't so empathetic. I probably think more than I act sometimes, but I'm trying to be very intentional in this season of my life of being active with empathy as opposed to just thinking about empathy.
Okay, so it's one thing for like anybody who's a leader to say, okay, I get it. Becoming more empathic sounds like a good thing to do. And I buy into this organizational culture stuff that we should be more empathic, especially over the last few years with so many social changes happening. The new generation, COVID, BLM, like everybody kind of gets it at an intuitive level that we need to be more empathic. But what are some of the actual practices? Like, is there anything that you do that you like? Is there like a little mental checklist that you have, or things, tools that you engage, like when somebody's coming to your office to sit down and talk to you, or like just I'm curious to know like your daily habits of becoming flexing the empathy muscle.
Yeah, there are different resources. Like one I came across was basically an empathy action wheel, and it breaks down because empathy is a complex. It's not simple and straightforward. There's a level of deepness, and you touch on that in your book. But there's a level of depth that we need to get to. So for me, I focus on being very intentional about how I approach the conversation and making sure that I'm approaching it from a perspective of active listening first and seeking to understand and just there's certain beliefs that I have formed that it's important. Like, let me close my computer when somebody walks in the door so I'm not distracted. Let me not look at the clock. If the conversation is moving along, let me ask a clarifying question if there's something I don't understand or I'm not sure about. So, just learning different tips and techniques and really working on my emotional intelligence too. That's been very important. So, I've gone through action planning around, EQ to build that and measured myself, established a baseline, and then worked intentionally to improve in like the area where I was most deficient just to get better in that space.
So that begs the question. Earlier, you said you're a family man of 4 children.
Yeah.
I think is wow. Um, do you suppose that some of the work you've done, some of the professional development and your own sort of like exposure to different uh, ideas and theories has changed how you are as a father and a partner in the home?
100%. Like the best training is the training that not only helps you within the workplace, but also helps you in your personal life. And so I've been through different training, around empathy where I was convicted and I realized, ooh, I'm not showing up as well as I should be at home. And there's some changes I need to make there because oftentimes I'll be excellent in the workplace, but then I'm going home and I'm exhausted because again, I'm introverted. So for me to be a certain way in the workplace, it takes a lot out of me if I have to be more outgoing and having a lot of conversations and then big groups. And so I go home sometimes and I'm exhausted. So I made a decision that I don't want when I go home for that to be the version of me that my children see because they're going to remember everything. The people at work may have one picture, but at home, I want them to have a very similar picture that I'm actively engaged, that I'm locked in, and that I'm focused on their needs as well. So just being very intentional about being the same in both places, even if that means I need to set some boundaries in the workplace and focus more time at home, that is going to yield more productive and better outcomes for myself, my wife, and my children as well.
Yeah, I'm sensing, I'm leaning into this word presence, that for you, the idea of being present for the
Mm-hmm.
people in front of you, the person in front of you, is actually a really big precursor to that whole empathic relationship opening up. Is that, would you say that's right?
That's right. I believe so. Being present means that you're dialed in. I'm not scrolling on my phone or disrupted or distracted by something else. So presence is critical, and you can feel if someone's present with you or if they're not.
Yeah, and I think, it's all too easy to just get distracted by our phones, even as our children are floating around the space, right? And they can sense that. They're like, Mom, get off the phone, or
Yeah.
Dad.
I had a moment. You want to hear the moment? It's actually a pretty funny story. So my 4-year-old, he comes up to me. He says, Dad, I'm going to break your TV. And at first I was like, why is he saying that? But apparently I have spent too much time looking at the TV and not enough time listening to him. So I realized I needed to make an adjustment. Like he told me that in a very interesting way, but he was signaling something to me that I needed to receive and make an adjustment. And I didn't need to just tell him, hey, you can't say stuff like that. I needed to explore why did you say that? And then really start to look in the mirror and say, was I doing anything to make him have an adverse reaction to that habit of mine of watching a show or watching TV? Am I watching it too much and not listening enough? So that's one example.
Okay, so this opens up for me. Okay, so I want to make a point here with a little counter story. I saw a video of a woman who was with a baby, maybe about a year old, doing like the cooing and the little gurglings and the like little, touching the toesies and whatever. And then the mother looked away. Okay, so I don't know whether she was looking at a book or at a phone or whatever, but she was looking away. And the baby was trying to get her attention in all sorts of ways. And you could see the baby's facial expressions going through elevating senses of urgency, of panic, like that the mom was not paying attention, until the baby started to cry. And then she started to pay attention and she did back to her usual motions, and the kid just like lightened up again. And this whole little video, I can probably place it. I'll place a link in the description notes of the video of this episode so people can watch, but it's breathtaking. Like there's no argument that what we see on the screen is because she stopped paying attention and she started paying attention again. Now, if that's the case with a child, and the idea, I think, behind this research was to say, when you neglect a child, they will do what they need to do to get your attention. And sometimes it's pretty dysfunctional behavior. I have a feeling in the workplace, if you come into a meeting and somebody's looking at the time or like ignoring what you're saying or whatever, you as a person still have the same psychology. The same amygdala gets excited or fired up when you feel threats. And social exclusion is a major threat to us still in 2023 as we wander around. I had a conversation recently with a woman who says we need to bring the F words to work, the feelings to the workplace, where we need to actually like recognize things like shame or disappointment or rejection or competition. Those are playing out in the workplace, and empathy can be a balm to some of those negative experiences.
No, I think that's a very, very critical point. I mean, from my perspective, and this is part of the training I had going through psychological safety awareness and leveling up there. But if you don't respond, or if you exclude someone in that way, there is a good chance that they do react in a negative way just to again get their voice out or whatever it is that is needed. Validation is very important. Justification, maybe not, right? So it's like, I validate that you feel this way, and it's important that you understand that I understand how you feel, but sometimes people are looking for justification. Like, if you are behaving in a bad way, I'm not going to justify that. Like, there's no justification for it, but there is validation for us to explore this further. And let's be curious about what's bringing these emotions or these feelings forward, as opposed to telling people, well, you need thicker skin, or you're too sensitive, and things of that nature. And that just creates this cycle of negativity and decreased morale, and unhealthy conflict and tension that just is hard to turn around once it gets started.
Hi there. At the risk of interrupting this great conversation, I just want to draw your attention to two things. There's over 150 episodes on the Purposeful Empathy channel. You may want to check them out, and I would invite you to press the subscribe button so that you get them into your mailbox every week so you don't miss a show. Thanks so much for watching. Without any ad spend or SEO, we have over 25,000 organic views. I want to thank you so much for watching. Again, hit the subscribe button. The world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play. So you mentioned psychological safety. I know that you, in your own coaching, you use the 4 stages of psychological safety framework. Okay, let's start with the higher level question. What does it mean to have psychological safety? Why is that important? And then let's talk about the framework.
Yeah, so there's a couple of definitions I would use. The one that's tied most closely to the 4 stages framework is a culture of rewarded vulnerability. And that one's really easy and simple for me to remember. Culture of rewarded vulnerability. The more common definition that we hear more frequently is that, it is the understanding that if you speak up, and you can do so without fear of retaliation, without fear, you can be candid as long as you're, doing so in a respectful manner, and you don't have to worry about adverse consequences hitting you because you're using your voice. And I use the words hitting you intentionally because that psychological effect of somebody either rejecting or retaliating against you, it is of high level intensity. It's sometimes even worse than physical pain. And there's some studies that would validate that thought process. So it's very important that we understand how psychological safety or lack thereof can affect people, and why we should raise awareness and help people navigate on both sides of relationships, what that looks like.
So, okay, a psychologically safe place or an organization that has a psychologically safe culture allows everyone to be authentic, be themselves.
Yes.
They feel safe to be themselves, which says a lot because there's a wide variety of identities out there, right? So everybody can be who they are and
Mm-hmm.
express themselves vis-a-vis their own personal lives, but also with respect to their work. So being able to be candid about what is possible or not possible, brainstorming sessions, like all of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's with the four stages, and the first stage being inclusion safety. So let's talk about that one a little bit. That is, I'll grant you inclusion safety on the basis of your humanity and that you are not bringing me harm in return. So you can't be yourself and cause harm to others and reach that level of safety because of the harm component, right? So being yourself is okay to the point where you're not causing harm to others, either physically or psychologically.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
And then the second stage is learner safety. So essentially, I'm going to offer you encouragement for your engagement, to learn and grow, to make mistakes, to ask questions, to be wrong. Like that answer is not factually accurate, but I appreciate you engaging and speaking up and trying to answer the question, right? So that's stage two. Stage three is
Can I
contributors.
just pause you on that before we go too fast on that? So I'm
Yeah,
like,
let's go.
in the context that I know, that would be the classroom, right?
That's right.
So I would love for students to put their hands up, even if they're not sure of their answer, they're taking a stab at it, because even if they're wrong, everybody's learning through osmosis and it's a learning space. Why wouldn't you want to put your hand up and, ask a question or say something that could potentially be wrong? But in the workplace, we are oftentimes, I think, kind of, I don't know, socialized to follow a particular way of being because the risks are quite high, right? Like you might not be liked by a boss, or you might, run into trouble with some colleagues or something, right? So that the idea of having a space where you're still in a learning modality, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and allowed to make mistakes, without shame. Like a shame culture actually like is really not innovative because everybody's like afraid. So this is really important actually to companies that want to succeed over the long term, right? Where they want people to grow and they want people to try new things and get away from groupthink. I mean, this is really essential to like the flourishing of an organization.
Yes, and I can use a different framework to kind of explain that in a little bit different way. So, Dr. Amy Edmondson, she wrote The Fearless Organization Teaming, many other great books, but she has a framework that she's entitled the Psychological Safety Zones, and it measures on one axis psychological safety level, and on the other axis performance accountability. Right. So, if you have high psychological safety and low performance accountability, you're in a comfort zone. If you're low, you're in the apathy zone. If you have a high performance standard, low psychological safety, you are in the anxiety zone. And if you have high psychological safety and high performance accountability, you are in what we call the learning zone, or the growth zone. And that's where we want to be. And so this idea of psychological safety doesn't mean that we take away expectations. So if I am hired to do a specific job, I need to be striving to be the best that I can in the seat that I'm in. But I also need to understand my expectations. I need to have a team and leadership that I can count on for support, and that they'll do their parts as well. And then psychological safety in that environment becomes an enabler to take us to the next level, which is really breaking through to innovation and really making some real good changes for the business. But it requires both psychological safety and the performance accountability standard in place.
And I think most people naturally want that anyways, right? Like positive psychologists talk about the drivers of, of wanting to live like a really exciting life. One is to continually learn and to continually grow. Like that gives us pleasure. So why wouldn't we want that for the organization, but also for the people within it? It's a win-win, right?
Yes.
Okay, number 3. Or were you going to say something? I don't want to cut you off.
No, you were perfect because the way I just explained that leads and the way that you just responded, it leads directly into contributor safety. It's the safety to contribute. And that is a stage that has to be earned. And so I could grant a person guided autonomy in exchange for the results that they have achieved. And so as you get results, you get more autonomy and it's not so automated and structured. You actually get more bandwidth because you have more competence in what you're doing and you have the safety to contribute at that level. So that's level 3. And
So
then
let me ask a question about that then, if you don't mind. There's a
sure.
lot of I'm getting questions about back to work. So there's a tension. I don't know if it's everywhere. You're in Georgia, right? If I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. So
Yes.
I don't know whether or not this is a Canadian thing. I think it's probably I think it's global. I think it's global. Thanks to the pandemic, we all worked from home, those of us who could. And then we found some like really positive outcomes from the work from home situation that we don't all want to go back to work, but there's a lot of pressure on the back to work, whether it's because companies want to have more control or feel that their employees are going to be more productive. Like, what's the tension? What have you got to say about that? Because your third one, make a contribution, is really about kind of like the agency that's involved in, you know, contributing. And people want to feel a certain sense of control over how they do that.
Sure. So I think it's about clarity of expectations and understanding what roles should be designated as remote, hybrid, or in person, because there's different, pros and cons to each approach of that. But realistically, an individual has to decide what working style is best for me and how do I go about pursuing that. When organizations seem to have tension around wanting to bring people back to work, to me, it is a signal that there may be some lack of clarity or potentially some mismanagement as far as people not really knowing what the expectations are. And it's a lot easier to manage those when people are right in front of you, have those conversations when people are right in front of you, if the work allows for you to be in any type of environment, if that makes sense. So if the work would allow you to be remote, hybrid, or in person, but there's a draw to pull people in, then there's a lack of clarity around expectations and getting to results.
So do
And
you
people feel comfortable about bringing people in to get those.
So do you feel that there should be, like, going forward, in essence, the options for certain roles? I mean, not all roles will have those options, but if, let's say, they're for the role that you have, you could be in person, you could be at home, or you could be hybrid. Is it up to the individual employee with the employer to kind of like set that, expectation? Or do you think that organizations as a whole should figure out what roles are which of those, and then the people just adjust?
I think there has to be some sort of a baseline understanding of what roles might be suitable for different, being remote, hybrid, or in person, and then a better conversation can happen.
Mm.
Um, but I also think going back to empathy, like we should be open as employers to understand if somebody has a need to want to work remote or hybrid and helping them maybe get to that path. And it might be a different role, if this role is one that really needs to be in person. So I think it can be kind of both, but I think foundationally, an organization should have a pretty good understanding of why a role is a certain way, especially in this climate, because it can't be just because, hey, we need to collaborate. Like you can collaborate virtually. Like there has to be a deeper meaning than just surface level responses in this case, because we're literally talking about the livelihood of other people. And since they've gotten a taste of it, they take it very seriously. And if you're saying, hey, it's not going to work, we should have some pretty good reasons as to why not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so you were going to say the fourth stage of
Yeah.
psychology.
Yeah, and it's challenger safety, and that's the hardest one to achieve because it is the one where you challenge the status quo in an effort to make things better, right? And so that may mean speaking truth to power, managing up, saying I don't agree with something, challenging this sentiment that, hey, this is the way we've always done things. We got to keep doing it. Because of your speaking kind of truth to power in a way, you certainly level up your costs. How expensive is it to have that interaction with somebody that's, in leadership, and you don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, and you think you might have a better solution that could drive the organization in a different way.
So, what can organizations do to create a culture of psychological safety?
That's a great question. That's probably $1 million question. I mean, but some baseline things is really modeling behaviors that invite those type of interactions. So, for example, if I'm a leader, I can say, "Hey, I just presented this idea to you. Tell me what's wrong with it. Like, poke some holes in it. Let's talk about it. Like, invite dissent and model that from the top down. That's the most important thing. Is are leaders demonstrating behaviors that emanate safety? Or are they speaking safety and then doing things that don't feel safe? Or do they allow somebody to get, you know, basically ridiculed in a public forum and not say anything in that situation? People are always going to watch. And when you raise awareness, you also raise expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not easy. Not easy. So do you think that it has to come from the leadership, or do you think it can come from the ground up too?
I think it needs to start top down. I think as people begin to learn more and they acclimate more so to that understanding, there's also a role other people have peer to peer too. But I think it has to start from the top, because if leaders aren't modeling it, there can't be a lot of traction from the bottom up, to get the leaders to change. The leaders need to really be the ones to change first.
So that means, like, whether it's hiring or promoting people along the whole chain, we have to be looking for a different set of characteristics that people have. You want competent people to do the job, but performance without these high touch EQ, empathy, psychological safety elements poisons and puts toxicity in the environment when you have the option to go with an equally competent person that has this, way of being, right? A way of nurturing and even promoting psychological safety. These are important things that we need to be paying attention to as we develop our organization.
Yeah, so there's always this big focus on like these technical or hard skills, and less focus on maybe the soft skills. That is shifted. It's now more about, I call them human interaction skills. Some might call them smart skills. But there has to be a focus on skill development and habit formation with people leaders. And if those habits and leadership tendencies can't be developed, then it's likely those individuals shouldn't be promoted or in leadership if they can't demonstrate empathy, if they don't know how to cultivate psychological safety, or not willing to learn how to do it. Because it is a journey. It's not a destination. It certainly is a journey.
And I think we're going to feel that more and more as the younger generation come up to the pike, because they won't tolerate it. They won't. Like, they're looking for places where they can be themselves, and
Right.
they collaborate differently where there is psychological safety in their spaces. And so, yeah. Okay, Brandon, I want to ask you a final question. I ask this always of my guests as the last question of the podcast. Thank you so much for being with me this afternoon. Can you think of a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what it meant for you?
Okay, I can think of a leader that I worked for, and this was probably 2 leaders ago. And so I moved from a role where I was like at a plant, so plant level HR manager, and I moved into a corporate space, and the corporate space was HR compliance. So investigations, harassment, discrimination, that was the lane I was traveling in. And it was terrifying, because if you look at all of my assessments and things of that nature, I don't like conflict. Like, conflict does not bring a sense of joy or peace in me. It makes me very uneasy. But I remember her just telling me, hey, I've got your back, just learn as much as you can, ask me questions, and anything that comes up, we'll manage through it together. And I mean, for me, going from a role that was, about 300 people might see me in a plant, and that's a different type of pressure, to a role that's enterprise level. And I would be interacting with all different types of people, a lot of people I don't know, I didn't have pulse for, to get that encouragement to learn and be able to have a level of growth. I won't say I was never comfortable, but I definitely was able to learn and grow as a result of her leadership. Her name's Heather, but she was able to help me navigate a brand new experience. And this was at the same time I was having my second son. And so he was a newborn as I was making this transition. So from the work pressure to the pressure of, having a brand new baby and going through a move, from one state, I came from South Carolina to Georgia, and I had never moved that far before. So a lot of different things happening, and her leadership really helped bring me through that situation in that season.
Oh, well, God bless Heather, right? So Helen?
Heather, yep.
Heather, she sounds like a great boss that understood the 4 stages of psychological safety and wanted you to be a learner in order to contribute,
Yep.
That's amazing. Yeah, we got to say a shout out to all the good bosses because they really make the difference in terms of your work experience, right? So with that, that's a great story. I hope you'll share the podcast with Heather, and I hope anybody else who's listening, who's got a Heather in your life, that you share the podcast and say, you're a Heather to me. Thanks so much, Brandon, for spending your afternoon with me. I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening. We'll see you next week. A Purposeful Empathy. Thanks so much for watching this episode, and I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. Purposeful Empathy is devoted to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. You've just done something about it by watching the show. Again, subscribe if you can, and consider picking up a copy today.